My name is Dr. Emma Feeney. I'm an assistant professor at UCD's Institute of Food and Health, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all here to the last of our presentations in the 2025 Public Lecture Series in Food and Health. The purpose of these lectures is to provide you with the most up-to-date scientific knowledge on topics in the area of food and health that are of interest to the public. Tonight's exciting lecture is on the topic of AI and digital technologies and their role in helping us to maintain a healthy and sustainable diet. Judging by the large number of people registered for tonight, this topic is of great interest. I am delighted to introduce you to our two speakers here this evening, Professor Brian Caulfield and Professor Eileen Gibney. Brian is a professor of physiotherapy in UCD. He has been involved in research related to wearable sensors and digital health technology for the last 15 years. This work has led to hundreds of scientific papers and has involved collaborations with a wide range of companies, including Intel Fujitsu Laboratories, Huawei, Novartis Shimmer Research, and Biomedical Research Limited. He has tested and evaluated more wearable sensor technologies than he cares to remember. He is also a co-founder of Output Sports, which is a sports technology company. Professor Eileen Gibney is a professor of nutrition at UCD, and she's the director of the UCD Institute of Food and Health. Her research interests are broad, covering most of the food system. In the area of personalized nutrition, she develops strategies and innovative technologies for personalized dietary and lifestyle feedback, including supporting the transition to healthy and sustainable diets. She also considers the impact of the food environment, examining the provision of healthy foods in retail environments, and the delivery of population nutrition guidance. Eileen is extensively published and works on national and international projects, and most recently, she has been appointed as the co-director for a €35 million co-centre for sustainable food systems with 17 partners across Ireland and the UK. So Brian, I think you're going to speak first. Whenever you're ready, please go ahead and start.
Okay, thank you very much, Emma. And thanks very much to Eileen and Geraldine and the Institute of Food and Health for inviting me to be part of this. It's a fantastic event to be part of. I'm going to speak this evening about wearables and apps for a healthy lifestyle and kind of focus in on the non-nutrition aspects of lifestyle before I hand over to Eileen to speak more about the nutrition side of things. And firstly, it's worthwhile, before we kind of talk about the technology that we have available to us today, is maybe to take a look back in time. And this is a picture of what's called the Mampometer, which was essentially the first commonly used activity tracker. And it came from, it was from a Japanese innovator. It was introduced to the market in the 1960s. It was a tilt switch based device that counted the number of steps. And it was marketed mostly to housewives in Japan at the time, and as actually quite a significant success. And it's very interesting that it, as part of the marketing campaign around this device, the company that was selling it came up with the magical figure of using 10,000 steps per day as a target. And that's a target that has stuck with us ever since. Now, there's actually quite a lot of scientific rationale to that target, but at the time it was essentially a marketing tool to try and convince people to become more active. And as the years have moved on, we've had quite a lot of developments in wearable technology for measuring human performance. These are some photographs I found of some very early stages at developing wearable technology in a laboratory setting, and I think you'll agree that it's cumbersome in the extreme and not likely to be very useful on a day-to-day purpose or day-to-day setting. And then even more recently, again, this image on the left-hand side is from our own research from just 20 years ago. And this was when we started to move out of being able to digitize and capture human performance outside of a motion capture laboratory setting. We started to use these inertial measurement units, the kind of technology that we were seeing introduced into the common world in airbags and in aircraft. Accelerometers, gyroscopes, magnetometers that helped us to generate a signal that we could use to measure activities of human living. And in the very early days of wearables in the research world that I entered into, if you wanted to get involved in this type of research, you needed to know some engineers and computer scientists, because you could not go and buy a wearable sensor off the shelf to measure human activity. You essentially had to design and build one yourself. And this one in the image is one that we built ourselves. And then a couple of years later, we were able to buy them off the shelf, but they were like these images on the right-hand side, where you had a lot of wires involved for any type of part of the body that you wanted to monitor, and an extremely expensive system. The system that's in that image there would have cost nearly 10,000 euro at the time. So we've had, in the intervening period, a massive explosion. And the really critical point in the development of wearable technology was between 2007 and 2010. And since then, the world of wearables has changed forever. And there were a couple of things that happened around that time that made a massive difference. First, we had the first commonly and widely available smartphone. The Apple phone or the iPhone wasn't the first smartphone, but it was the first smartphone that became, as I said, widely available, and it provided people with a very powerful computing platform that they could carry around in their pockets. It was equally a very powerful persuasive interface. It was able, we could display data, we could display information on the device, and we could use that to motivate people. And along the same time, companies like Nike developed the Nike Pod, which would link to a watch and could measure the number of steps that you did. And other companies like Polar developed that type of technology that was based on rechargeable accelerometer pods that you either put on your chest strap or put on your foot or attach to your shoe. So that type of technology was the first widely available sensor technology and mobile computing technology. And after that, everything changed. Soon after that, we started to see companies like Misfit and Jawbone and Fitbit enter the market. Fitbit put their first devices out in 2008. This one on the right-hand side is actually the first Fitbit Generation 1 device. And interestingly enough, for most of you today, you think of Fitbit as being a watch. It wasn't a watch, it was something you clipped onto your belt. And it was available for $99, which was an amazing achievement at the time to put that technology in people's hands. And that started that first wave of wearables. Now, at the time, wearables were primarily a technology for measuring activity. They were, generally speaking, the first wave of wearables had accelerometer sensors in them that enabled us to generate the data that we could put through algorithmic processes and use that to count the number of steps that a person was taking. Then soon after that, we developed the capability to monitor whether or not a person was sleeping with this type of technology. But wearables today are completely different. We have so much more capability available to us today. We now have a very wide range of manufacturers. I couldn't begin to count the number of manufacturers. What I have here on the screen are just some of the examples of the manufacturers, what I would say the more popular manufacturers on an international scale. I think here in Ireland, we're probably most familiar with Samsung, Apple, Fitbit, and Garmin. Whoop is also very common in the kind of sporting setting. But internationally, when you move around different countries, you'll see other companies like Huawei would be much more popular in other countries. Polar is very popular in Scandinavia. And now we're seeing wearables that are available for capturing a wide range of measurement targets, but also wearables that are like that early stage was something you had on your wrist or you clipped onto your belt and it just measured activity. Now we have smart clothing, we have smart glasses, we have smart fabrics, we have wearables in shoes, in our socks, in all sorts of different parts of our body that we can put wearables on. And the watch is still the king though. The vast majority of wearables that are sold internationally today are still smartwatches. The difference being the early range of smartwatches typically just had accelerometers in them. Soon after, we started to get accelerometry and gyro, and then we had PPG or optical sensors, temperature sensors, all sorts of new sensing capability came into the smartwatch, to the point where when we started out in 2009, the wearables gave us the capacity to measure activity or steps. We now can measure a very wide range of biometric targets: sleep, heart rate variability, pulse oximetry, respiratory rate, energy expenditure or calorie count, some biomechanical measures, measures of power and speed, circulating glucose, blood pressure or hypertension estimates. And then we have what we call these composite scores of stress or body battery type measures. Those of you who are familiar with Garmin devices will be familiar with the Garmin body battery measure. And wearables have become very, very common in everyday life and everyday, no matter where we go. This is international data from 2023 that showed at the time the kind of, the percentage of the population who report habitually using a wearable device, a smartwatch or some type of smart wearable. And, depending on the country, you can see that it's, in and around the mid-40s on average. Here in Ireland, we're actually ahead of the game. We actually have a much higher penetration of smart wearable usage than most countries. We're in around 60%. So we are more digitized, shall you say, than a lot of countries in the world. So we now have this, proliferation of relatively inexpensive wearable devices that give us the capacity to measure a wide range of biometric targets. The vast majority of them are in smartwatch form. We're starting to see, ring devices becoming very popular as well. And the question is, what do we need to consider when we're trying to choose a wearable device and a companion app to go along with it? Well, I think the first thing we need to do when we're trying to decide what type of wearable to get is to figure out what it is we want to do with it. Are we trying to get fit or train for a specific sport, recreational sport? Are we trying to monitor health indicators for specific healthcare applications and manage a already identified health issue that we might have? Or are we just trying to make some positive lifestyle changes? And that will affect the type of wearable requirements that we are interested in. And then the next thing is to try and evaluate different wearables within an application context. And we can look at a wide range of application contexts, from accuracy and reliability right through to the cold hard facts of how much it costs and whether or not we have to pay a monthly subscription fee. And I'll just run through a few of these. The first is accuracy and reliability. This is something that we do a lot of work on in UCD. Myself and a colleague, Calva Doherty, are part of a European network of universities called the Interlive Network. And Interlive publishes or designs and then publishes guidelines for validating wearables. So we set down guidelines for manufacturers to follow when they are trying to determine or demonstrate that their wearable device is as accurate as they are claiming it is in their advertising material. And we have so far produced guidelines for things like validation of step counts, heart rate, energy expenditure, calorie consumption, or estimation of maximal oxygen consumption. As well as that, there's a range of work in UCD which is associated with trying to understand what the level of accuracy of existing wearable devices is. A very nice piece of work in this regard is work that was led by Calva, which has involved a living umbrella review of all the research related to the accuracy of wearables with respect to various biometric measurement targets. And typically speaking, we are, depending on the biometric measurement target, we are sometimes getting relatively good estimates of the target. So for example, for heart rate and step count, we tend to be quite accurate across different wearable devices. But for things like estimation of energy expenditure or caloric counting of activity, we're not tending to be very good in the wearable devices that are available on the market. And you can see there that, we've some wide-ranging things like estimation of sleep can be quite poor in some cases. If you want to learn a lot more about this type of research, I would recommend that you go and look at a YouTube channel that Calva has set up. If you just search Calva Doherty on YouTube, you'll find his channel very quickly. And there's a wide range of really good, short, easy to understand videos related to this type of topic. A new target that wearables in the last month have received quite a bit of publicity around is estimation of whether or not an individual has hypertension. And Apple has recently received regulatory clearance for a hypertension detection feature on its Apple Watch. When you start to dig really deeply into the numbers, you see that it's actually not very accurate. It's detecting hypertension in approximately 40% of cases of real hypertension. So it is a good guide as to whether or not hypertension may exist, but it certainly would not be considered as something that is at the level of accuracy that would be useful for managing hypertension. Another area is these body battery scores. Again, a nice review carried out in UCD on body battery estimates is showing that, generally speaking, I think the most generous thing I could say about them is that they are opaque and vague. And I would say that you should take them with the largest pinch of salt that you can possibly hold in your hand at one time. They are only a very general estimate of your overall health. There's no transparent published research underpinning these types of body battery type measures. Another area we need to consider is privacy and data security. And another recent review out of the group in UCD is also compared and scored all of the different manufacturers according to their the transparency and the openness of their data privacy policies. Typically, when we buy these devices, we just accept the terms and conditions without really reading the detail. But in this research, the detail was combed over with a fine-tooth comb. And broadly speaking, if you're seeing pink on this graph, it's generally a bad outcome. A general kind of picture I can tell you is that the devices that are originating out of companies from Asia are tending not to have as much transparency and clarity in the privacy policies as those from other parts of the world. And then human factors or usability is a major issue. I've evaluated and tested a very large number of wearable devices over the years, and I can tell you that a lot of them seem to be designed not to be used by humans over a long period of time, putting it mildly. There's issues like, battery charging requirements, or even the problems that you get sometimes with the interfaces in the wearables themselves, the interfaces in the apps, trying to connect the charger to the charging cable to the device, etc. There's a lot of usability issues, and I would recommend that if anybody is considering buying a particular device, go online and read the reviews from the real users, not the people who've been paid to review it. As well as that, speak to people you know who have already had one for 6 months or more, and they'll be able to tell you all of the pain points associated with these devices. A big issue in this area is trying to figure out how your wearable fits in with the ecosystem. Because when you buy a wearable device, mostly it may have a very small display if it's a watch. Some wearable devices have no display, so you're not able to get any feedback from the device itself. Typically, you will have a primary software application from the wearable manufacturer, such as Garmin or Fitbit, etc., where you will aggregate and display the data within the manufacturer's app environment. But oftentimes, to get real value out of it and to get a real service from the wearable and to interact with people who can help you interpret the data, you will then have to use a third-party software platform or a third-party service provider, where the data that's going from the device to the primary software application will then need to go on to a third-party application where you can really interact with it at a service level. And frequently where we're seeing this being of great value is in the employee assistance program providers, who are providing wellness programs that are often backed up by health coaches, who are going to interpret your wearable data and then give you some practical advice as to how you can manage your lifestyle or manage whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Another issue with wearables is overload, information overload. And we're starting to see a lot of pushback in the literature from people who are saying, these wearables are generating an awful lot of data for me, and they're leading to anxiety, but not leading to an awful lot of insights that I can really use to help positively change my life. And I could say, I'm going to finish up now, but what I could say is that what we are really good at today with wearable technology is capturing data, processing that data to deliver health metrics that are of, in some cases, very good quality and accuracy, in other cases, not so good. We're good at presenting the results to the user. What we're getting better at is helping people interpret results and guide users through a program. And this is where AI and the proliferation of large language models is coming in. And we're just seeing in the last year, a lot of the manufacturers of wearable devices with the companion apps are starting to introduce AI capability, which is providing some insights. So instead of just providing summaries of people's activity or sleep or whatever they're measuring, they're going beyond that, and they're starting to give some reasoned insights into what they're seeing, and sometimes cross correlating between one biometric target and another to give some useful information or useful insights to the end user. And I think that's somewhere where I think we're going to start to see a lot of really interesting developments in the next 12 to 18 months. Where we need to get a lot better is how we integrate the data from wearables into third-party services, such as when you go to your general practitioner, that the data that you're generating would be of use to the GP in making decisions around your health, or when you go to a specialist in a clinic. Currently, there's no interaction between the wearables that we use in our everyday lives and healthcare. And that's something that we need an awful lot more improvement on. It's a major, major challenge, but it's one that I think we'll start to see some improvement on in the next 2 to 3 years. And then finally, I'm going to finish with this thought, is that what technology cannot do for you is help you be more active or exercise, sleep more, have a better diet, or be less stressed. What it can do is it can provide you with information that will help you manage all of that. But ultimately, it's not going to do it for you. And that's the problem of behavior change, is the most difficult bit. And I'll leave you at that. Thanks very much, Emma.
Thank you so much, Brian. A really fascinating talk, and amazing to think that these have been actually around for so much longer, I think, than many of us would have thought. So that's really, really fantastic. I can see lots of questions coming in on the chat already. So just as a reminder, we will have a Q&A session at the end of both talks. And please do keep your questions coming in on the chat, and we'll keep that Q&A going then at the end. So our next speaker now is Professor Eileen Gibney. And Eileen, whenever you're ready. And just a reminder, everyone, please just keep those questions coming in on the chat. Thanks so much.
Great. So hopefully you're able to see my slides there, Emma.
Yeah, we can see them. They look
great. Okay, so I'm just going to follow on from Brian and his insights into wearables, and I'm going to really talk a little bit more about diet and how we measure our diet. And I'm going to start with this to say, ultimately, at the end of the day, what we want to do is to try and eat a healthy, balanced diet. We have that defined already, and it's provided in our food-based dietary guidelines, as you can see here. So all of the help and advice that we might get from our dietary kind of apps that do us, they should be pointing us to this at the end of the day to support everybody to get there. The big thing is that very few people are actually following these food-based dietary guidelines. And this is some data that we've generated in a project that we had. And it can show that if you have all the different shelves there you see on the food pyramid, if there's 6 of those, no one was following all 6. About 8% were following 4 of them, 2% 5. So what we see is that people struggle to follow these food-based dietary guidelines. And in that sense, they were all starting to ask for support and to help to try and do those. Now, we know support is very effective in, areas of our life that we want to change or that we want to do better in. So things like weight loss or smoking cessation or breastfeeding or exercise, as Brian has mentioned. That concept of supporting your change in those activities is something we know that does work. And it works also in the area of your diet. So that's where a lot of the apps that we have, and I'm going to focus a little bit, I suppose, on those mobile apps for the moment that support this kind of calorie counting or different ways of looking at our diet. I put the list of the ones that are given here by Forbes. I could have filled this with probably hundreds of different logos. But what I'm showing you here is just a snapshot of different types. And what they essentially do is ask us to log our diet. And then when we've logged that diet, it either gives us some advice or recommends some changes towards us. So what they do a lot of the time is they track our food intake so that we can log our meals and record it. We might be able to then, scan products rather than and write them in a particular way. They might then provide personalized plans. They may or may not do that. What they might just do is literally just track your nutrient intake within that. And they might then offer you some meals and recipe ideas to help you with those personalized plans, or simply just offer those based on what you've already eaten. And really what they're trying to do is to do what Brian has said, is to track and to show you that information, to say you've eaten this is where you should be, and just let you monitor what you're doing. And then that way it reinforces your behavior or shows you where you need to change within those. But behavior change is the big thing. So I'm assuming that the individuals who are perhaps using these apps, a lot of them want the support to change their behavior or to maintain a particular behavior that they have at that time. So to do that, that is one of the most complex things. And what we have is a lot of these models and ways of looking at behavioral change. The one we have here is called the behavioral change wheel. And what it looks at is sources of behavior, the things that might be psychological or physical or social or reflective. And then it shows ways in which you can offer to change for those behavior. So whether it's to enable someone, to coerce them to do something, to reward them to do something, to educate them to do something. And all of these, are ways in which we can support people to actually change. And there are actually what are inbuilt into these applications. So this is a review that looked at all the behavioral change approaches that are involved in these dietary recording apps. And a lot of them will provide knowledge. They'll just give you back information around that. Others might support, a particular belief that you have, that you want to do something or follow a particular type of diet, and they reinforce that belief for you. They'll give you, an awful lot of intentions and goals. So you at the beginning often say, I want to, to achieve this, and it'll support and you tell you how you're doing against that. So it allows you to understand, have you met that goal or not? How much more do I need to change, and things like that. And it should help you with memory and keeping that at the forefront of your mind. So there's a lot of ways in which they can help and they can influence the way we can change our behavior. So when we look at these, what we then have to do is, I want to go back into the theory behind it. So when we put the information in here, it's really important that we start to think about the type of information that we provide, and then the type of insights that they give us from that information. So these all kind of measure your diet in a variety of different ways. You have to put information in, and then it tells you about that. So when we look at translating recording of foods to what we call nutrients, and nutrients are your energy, your carbohydrate, your fat, your protein. And a lot of the time we list our foods, what we have for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, and we put in a description of those. And then it asks, well, how big was that portion? Is it a small bowl or a big bowl of breakfast cereal? Was it 2 slices of toast or 4 slices of toast? And what it does is it takes that information, and then using additional information about how much carbohydrate, fat, energy are in those foods, it then calculates what we call nutrient intake. But it's really important that we actually look at these individual components, because if we don't get the food description right, we're not giving them the right information. So a lot of the time you have to give them really good information to make sure that they're giving you the right information back. So when you write chicken in, it's really important that you understand that you've actually said whether it's a breast of chicken, whether the chicken had the skin on, whether it was maybe a thigh, because that's got more brown meat than the white meat that might be in a breast. And this is where that if you don't describe the food really accurately that you're putting in there, then the information that they return back to you is not going to be correct. And it's no fault of their own. It's just that we haven't given the right description for them. Similarly, if you type milk, it could be that actually they will make an assumption that it might be the semi-skimmed or whole milk. And these are cow's milk here. And you can see that there's quite a significant difference in the amount of, say, fat within those, or a huge variation in calories. So one of the first things that we think about is that you really have to make sure that you describe the food really accurately. And this is because we have to, unlike what Brian was talking about, they measure something from you. In these ones, you have to often input the food. And if you're doing so, you have to make sure you do it well. When it comes to portion size, it's really difficult. You might be given a choice to say how many grams of a particular food you put in, or it might be that they ask, was it a cup size or a spoon of something or a packet of something? And it becomes quite difficult often for us to be able to do that. So we have to have a little bit of a guess here. It could be that they can offer photos. So these are some examples from some of those where they actually sort of say, like in a bowl, these are the 3 sizes of these foods here: risotto, mackerel, salad, and an apple. Very interesting combination. But, you know, you can see the sense here that they're looking, actually, they get bigger as they go along, and you select the portion sizes from those. Or for the chicken there, it just sort of talks about, this is a phone, and then this is what the serving looks like beside it. So again, you have to try and get that information right, because if you want to get accurate information back from those, this is important to do so. So when we have all of that information, that should be the answer, isn't it? We should actually get some really nice detailed information from them on which we can then make decisions. But that's not always the case. And unfortunately, one of the main reasons is that we actually lie a lot when it comes to dietary, recording our diet, whether we do it consciously or subconsciously. So then if it's subconscious, it's not a lie, but we've forgotten. But there's about 30% of, when we look at it in research, the days of dietary intake that we record, about 30% of them are completely invalid. So that's nearly 1 in every, 1/3 of the diet. So out of 3 days, 1 of those days, we just haven't done it properly. And a lot of people either forget what they've eaten, they don't want to record some of the foods that they have, so they underreport some foods, and then they overreport others. So about 30% of the data is just not viable. The other thing we need to make sure is that actually the tools that you're using need to also be accurate. And there's been a number of reviews that have shown, regardless of what they've done in this one is that they've actually compared it to a gold standard. So they've compared it to, you know, like Brian described, you actually compare it to something that measures something quite accurately, and then you look at all of the apps. And what you can see here is each one of those are individual apps, and you can see variation from underreporting of calories of about 400%, so 400 calories, to those that were actually quite accurate. But on average, they might underestimate your energy by about 200 calories. They might underestimate your carbohydrate by about 25 to 30 grams, fat by about 15 grams, and protein by about 20 grams. So overall, some can be accurate, some can be reasonably inaccurate. And that's to do with whether or not they've actually given you and been able to give you the right food composition, the right portion size, etc., and then being able to provide that dietary information in a very well. This is another one study that looked at this, and this was like 3-day diets in a week, and this was using data from the USDA and some of the apps that they've, or some of the tools that they've used there. And again, you can see this huge variation. You can see variation in calories, with some being overestimating and others underestimating. And you can see that again in your protein, your fat, and your carbohydrate. So depending on the app that you're using and depending on the particular information that you're putting into it, it may not be very accurate. And that's something to keep an eye on. So is it all a lie? And even if we do lie, does it really matter? Well, it doesn't, because we want to know if they're effective. So even if you put in some information and even if you're given some advice, is it still okay? Do they still have an effect? So this was a review that looked at all of it's a variety of apps. They looked at 46 apps, if I remember, across this paper. And within those, only 60% of those actually used a behavioral change, so that a lot of them just took the information and gave the information back to you. So they weren't actually trying to support you in behavioral change, but they were just giving you information. Of those 40 or 60%, actually, very few of them, so only 24% of those, measured a behavioral change. And of those, actually only sort of 7 out of the original 40 odd showed sustained behavioral change beyond 6 months. So it is really important that whilst we can have all these tools around us, they're not going to be the simple answer in actually having long, effective change within those. And this study showed also that some of them had an actual detrimental effect, although it was a very small percentage. So they're not going to be the silver bullet to say, this is how it's going to change my diet. I'm going to do this. That is all back to you. But what these tools are supposed to do is to support you in that. But if they are going to support you, then you actually need to choose a tool that will actually provide you with the support that you need to make the changes that are required. And not all of them have that built into them. So then the question comes, well, can AI help? And this is an area that an awful lot of people are looking at now, sort of saying, you know, we have the ability, this new explosion of artificial intelligence and machine learning, etc. And there are ways in now which artificial intelligence are beginning to integrate into the dietary assessment area and the feedback that it can provide. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples. It can help with image recognition. So rather than actually describing your food and sort of saying whether or not it's chicken, actually you could take a picture and it might be able to tell you that it is actually, you know, fried chicken legs, and it can give you specifics of that. You can take a picture of fruit salad and it can say that it's a measure of different types of colors of fruit, and then it can estimate the nutrient quality from those. So it will have the ability to do this, but it is really important that we try to continue to improve these. And that's what an awful lot of machine learning is continually trying to improve on this. It's going to make mistakes, but it's actually getting really good in this context. You are able to scan products. So rather than actually have to write, I had 2 slices of a particular bread, you might be able to scan the packet of bread or the biscuits or the product that you've eaten, and actually it will provide the correct name and nutritional information because that barcode is unique. Firstly, that's limited to specific, only to packaged products. So it actually can't scan all of the food that you consume. And that information is based then on data that could have been utilized from, you know, different techniques like data web scraping. It might have been purchased through different entities that sell this kind of information. It might be provided by manufacturers, but actually a lot of them are now crowdsourced. So the 2 examples I have here are Yucca, which is one that is used across Europe, where you can actually look at it and it'll provide some information about the food. But this Open Food Facts is actually one where it's a lot of consumers can use this to scan products, get information. If you scan the product and the information isn't into it, you can input data. So you become part of that process. But the big issue, and MyFitnessPal and Lose It and others do this as well, but we need to make sure that we have maintained quality in this. And that's one of the important areas, because we're relying now on data. And we all know that products can change over time. Have we got the most up-to-date information, etc.? And have we quality controlled the information from these? But again, they're tools that allow us and inform us at a particular time point, maybe when we're purchasing or looking at a particular food. When it comes to personalization, AI can have a really significant effect. So personalization means that when I log my food or my lifestyle app, that I get recommendations that are relevant to me based on the information that I've given you. So based on your diet or maybe additional wearables or some information I've given about my health, etc. But what we need is really large data to develop algorithms to provide that personalized advice. So a lot of the time you will see companies building up their capabilities in this area, but they need to have really, really significant data collected previous to that on which they can base that. Then those recommender systems that can be developed really should go through some really robust validation and checks. And this is why Brian and I have presented published papers to you to sort of say, yes, it is valid or it isn't valid. And that's really important for you if you're using any of these to support your behavioral change, that you look to make sure that they've actually published and shown that information. And then the question is, where are they used? At the moment, they're used in personal support, but will they eventually have a role in public health? And I think Brian brought that up, that actually could these pieces of information all coalesce together to actually sort of say we can measure all of this stuff, and actually it can be used not just at my own personal level, but it can be given to my doctor, it can be integrated into advice and support the healthcare system in supporting and providing advice. We've done some work on this kind of personalized approach. This is a study that we conducted looking at sustainable healthy eating guidelines, where we provided personalized approach for healthy eating guidelines, like I showed at the beginning, or sustainable healthy eating guidelines. And we were able to show that we were able to improve sustainability for the ones that got the sustainability. Even if we provide you with health eating guidelines, we were able to improve your eating. So giving people personalized advice really does work. And there are companies that are really accelerating the scale on this. So Zoe is an example, but what they have is they have studies. There's a good number of them listed here with a few thousand people who have completed these, and they have data sets in their commercial areas as well with hundreds of thousands of data points. But what they're able to do in these studies is to data mine those to be able to look for patterns to predict whether or not if you eat a particular way, you'll respond a particular way, and can they give advice to change those. So they've looked at that in the terms of glycemic response, how much sugar, the sugar after you've consumed, and if we give advice, can we change the way it does that? We could look at responses in terms of lipids and other markers following food consumption, and they can look at the interaction between the microbiome and the food that you eat. And based on all of this information, they can provide personalized advice, and hopefully that then would be effective in supporting the right behavioral change for you. But what really is important is, as any of these kind of apps or supports are out there, you need to make sure that they have the evidence behind those. Looking forward in terms of a crystal ball, the last couple of slides, this is going to run away. This is going to be an area where we're going to see huge and very rapid change. We're working in the area of looking at meal-based images. So rather than looking at taking a picture of each individual plate, can I just take a picture of all of it together? And am I able to make sense of that? And using data, image, and machine learning, we're able to do that. And we're beginning to show positive ability in looking at intakes at a meal level. We are going to see, and there are already glasses, smart glasses, not many of us wear them, but we are beginning to see the ability for these to recognize food as we consume them, look at the portions, and then rather than us having to actually input that after we've consumed something, that it just habitually is collected for us, and then we could provide information. And we might be able to look at a shelf, press a button, and as you see here, get advice from the food on the shelf, and then a warning to say, yes, choose this or don't choose this based on your recommendations. We know that there are smart, I suppose, connected areas in the kitchen. And I think this is something that if we can join all of these dots together, not just the wearables that we have, not just these recommender systems maybe from our food, but also our smart homes, then we can actually create this technological holistic view of our lives. I love my technology. I'd buy one of these fridges in a heartbeat, but my fridge is never organized like that. But there are fridges that can actually look at what you have within it, and then are able to say you can cook this or you can cook that. And it won't be too long in the future either where we might actually have a robot who would be able to cook it for us. So we're not there yet, but we're not far away from some of these realities. So just to conclude, support is important for change, and the apps should be the ones that provide that for you. It is important that you give accurate information about the food and the portions so that we can get the right composition and give you the right nutrient information. It has to be accurate from you, but the tool also has to be very accurate as well. And you'll see huge variation in those tools, as I showed you, which can be sometimes down to the tool, but also sometimes down to the user. And maybe part of that might be the user experience that Brian also spoke about. AI will help, but it needs an awful lot of data. But that data has to be of high quality, and we have to have lots of it. So it might take a little time for that to really have a positive effect unless we can provide all of that data very